Hey everyone, so this is going to be a lot of fun. I've been kind of wanting to do one of these videos for a while, and so today's little BBC debacle, I guess, is going to be a good excuse to do one. So this will be a really good video for everyone, though. I'm really excited. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the OHS. I mean, of course I've seen this material before. Of course I've seen it. But I'm going to go through this OHS as if I haven't. I'm going to go through Unit 2. So Unit 2 materials wrapping up this week, as you'll see, per the Magic Calendar that should be it should be out today. If not, it'll be in the Magic Calendar section. And I'll probably just attach a copy to the video as well. I'll show you, this is, Unit 2 is wrapping up. So if I was approaching Unit 2 as a student, I'm going to show you how I would go through it, but then also I'm going to kind of comment on this as a game designer. So what do I think, how does this stuff apply to the real game design industry? So one of the things I'm trying to do this year is blur those lines between, really blur the lines between, what students seem to think game design is and what game design really is. So game design, what it really is much more, it's not just playing games, it's not just designing games. It's a lot of collaboration, a lot of group work, it's a lot of documenting. There's a lot of writing involved. There's a lot of, it's just much more involved than a lot of students think. So I'm gonna try to give you some perspective based on what is in Unit 2. So let's go jump right into Unit 2, starting with the unit summary. So this is kind of the stuff that was on the calendar for last week. It's not a lot, 2.0 through 2.2, I think is what it was. So you have your unit summary, which you're going to be talking about kind of, what is it, what makes up a game. Okay, so what makes up a game? So it says you'll be able to define the game. So you'll be able to define what a game is. I don't know if they give you really any genre in here stuff. We used to go over like all the different genres of gaming, but now since those lines have really started to get blurred, it doesn't matter as much anymore. Identify 3 player perspectives. I actually think maybe it's not very, so this is part of my feedback, right? I don't know if it's the best thing to teach students about game genres, because if you really shouldn't get too stuck to those. Most of the best games nowadays are kind of blurring the lines between multiple genres anyway. So I mean, it's good to have, I guess, a baseline, but not really. All right, so so we're going to start, we're going to keep moving forward with kind of developing our video game. Now, you may not think that you are developing your game already, but you are. You're working through some of the most important steps, which is kind of laying the foundation. So what's in a game? So we talked about fun, we talked about goals and actions, and so this is all going to be talking in 2.1. This is all going to be talking about balancing this idea of giving the player something to play for, giving them enough challenge, but also making it fun. So if a game is way too fun, and well, not way too fun, that's kind of a weird one, but if it's way too easy, and it's just all like goals and very easily achievable goals, it might keep them engaged for a while, but you're not going to keep a huge majority of gamers which want some kind of challenge. Like that's just true. Now, every game, even clickers, have some kind of challenge. There is some depth to every single game, even like clicker games. I mean, I don't know what, in some of them, I don't know what that is, but even games, like what was the one, there was one about venture capitalist. There was a venture capitalist game that was so popular, and everybody thought it was like, well, there's no skill, but there really is. There's skill involved in which one, which things you upgrade, and there was a now there's an algorithm behind it. Once you figure out that algorithm, it is what it is, but there's still depth in every game. Okay, so make sure that you have a certain amount of goals, certain amount of action, things that players can work towards, things that players can do and feel some sort of accomplishment while also making it fun. So this balance is very, very difficult to find in gaming. So most games are either too easy or they're too difficult. So you just have to find that right balance. Now, there are games who really push both of these boundaries, especially when it comes to difficulty. Games like Dark Souls is a great example of Dark Souls is but what I would argue is look at how Dark Souls, they may have a smaller population that actually play the game for 60 hours plus, which is kind of a jumping off point for game designers. If you can get a gamer to play a game for 60 hours, that's pretty good. 60 hours plus, they may have a very small population, but that population is probably playing 400, 500 plus hours. So those are games that would benefit more from DLC and stuff like that. So we talk about this stuff kind of later in the year. Another thing though is rules. So making sure that you have clear defined rules in your game. So remember, that doesn't mean that all your rules have to be posted on the game all the time, or your tutorial has to be like hand-holding tutorials. Okay, some games do great tutorials, but never actually even using any text or any voiceover. The tutorials are simply like a level that kind of brings you through. You have to learn by trial of error, and those are some of the funnest games to me, are ones that don't actually teach you this stuff. You just kind of have to learn as you go. But this clear, defined set of rules, and that's just, that's really important to making a game feel like it's structured and making you feel like you can, be successful in it. So I talked about algorithms. Algorithms you're going to see a lot in game design. The algorithms are everywhere. No matter what is done in a game, it has to do with an algorithm. An algorithm is just simply a set of rules or a set of steps that we take in order to solve a problem, right? So it's anything that is done during a game has some kind of algorithm behind it, whether or not it's the amount of ammo that's being used, or if it's a level system, or if it's which levels your character's jumping to, and which enemies come out. All this stuff is handled by using algorithms. And here's a little bit of pseudocode to kind of help you about what an algorithm looks. So I would take snapshots of things like this. Any words that are in bold, I always like to keep. I would copy and paste. Same thing for my college classes. If it's in bold, I copy it, I paste it, I keep it on a big notebook or a OneNote or Evernote or whatever. So make sure you do that. Non-playable characters. So we're kind of peeling apart the layers of what a game is. So we know that a game is a set of rules. We know that it's a set of actions. It's a set of goals. It's also has to do with players in the game. Now, some players are playable characters. There's also things called non-playable characters, which are your artificial intelligence. Those are your AI. Some AI are more complex than others. So you have some games where the AI may seem very unrealistic, and some AI where it seems really, really smart, right? So it just depends on the level of detail and realism and challenge you want to put in your game, whether or not your AI is smarter or not. And then there's also things like learning AI. So a game that came out recently called Hello Neighbor. And all these references you can look up, Google and whatever, and get some, perspective. But even, games like Hello Neighbor. Hello Neighbor has a learning AI. So as you play the game, it learns how you play, and it gets better and better. It gets harder to beat the game the longer that you don't beat it, which is really cool. This is kind of a new thing I think is going to gain some steam in the industry. And so we talked about challenges, making the game challenging, but it's a balance. Remember, you can't make it too challenging or you're going to lose a lot of your player base unless that's what you're marketing toward. If you're marketing toward challenge, it's not so bad. So we talked about gameplay in class. Gameplay is anything that involves a set of rules that you can do, and it is fun. Usually, it's engaging. It makes your players want to play. So everything from like tic-tac-toe. These are like some game strategies for like board games. Tabletop games are a great example of this idea of challenge and rules. But we have those in video games as well. So we talked about this easy to play, difficult to master. This is such an important concept in game design, and it's a balance that game designers are always trying to find, and it's really hard to find because, like I said, you want anyone to be able to pick up your game and play. Okay, and I think the example it uses is tic-tac-toe, right? Yeah, tic-tac-toe. Tic-tac-toe is not difficult to master. It's very easy to play, but it can be mastered within 2 or 3 games. Any sensible person can play tic-tac-toe and realize that you can master the game. You can play it to the best of its ability within 3 or 4 games of playing it and realize it. Even my 5-year-old could beat me in tic-tac-toe now, or not beat me, but like tie with me, which is we both mastered the game. Tetris, however, is a great example of a game that's very easy to play. Everyone can play it, right? It's easy. You just line up lines, but it's so difficult to master. There's so much math behind Tetris, and so that's that balance you're trying to find. Some games like Tetris have found that perfectly, and it makes it very, very difficult to do. So Dark Souls, if you like I said, look these up. Demon Souls or Dark Souls would be a great example of a game that's very, very difficult to master, but it's not easy to play. It's not, my 5-year-old cannot pick up a controller and just go play Dark Souls. It just doesn't happen. There's a lot of stuff there's a lot of skills you have to have before you play that game. So that's yeah. And I'm not saying that games that don't find that balance can't be successful. For example, Dark Souls is super successful, but it's also a very niche market that likes Dark Souls. So game genres, we talked about this a little bit. So here's a list of these. Go through, I would just go through these, and what I would do in this situation, I would try to find an example of each one. Okay, so I would look through these and try to find an example of each one. So, for example, a rhythm game would be something like Guitar Hero. You have, I could probably do this really quick. This would be cool. An action game is going to be any kind of, usually a third person, maybe not a third person shooter. But a third-person game with a lot of speed, a lot of action. Nex Machina, I think, is a really good one. A good example of that. Adventure games are usually going to be like quests. A good one example of that's Fable. Puzzle games are going to be like Candy Crush, simulation, flying, driving, Forza Motorsports, sports games, obvious. Strategy games. So don't just think about when you're talking about strategies, don't just think about chess and checkers. That's not, that's strategy, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about like RTS, real-time strategy. So games that require some kind of planning before you play. Role-playing games, some of my favorite. It's where it's kind of like a simulator, but for humans. That's kind of whether or it's humans or elves or whatever you want to do. Roguelikes, that's really weird to me that they gave it its own genre. I don't know if I would give roguelike games its own genre. But it's really just a type of RPG that just focuses on rogue stuff, like moving around quietly. I don't know if I really agree with that, so I might even take that out. And then the other two, yeah, you know what they are. Like it says, meat and potatoes of gaming, I guess. So, breaking down gameplay. So, we talk about game mechanics. Game mechanics are just things the game does, okay? Anything that you interact with, anything that moves, those are game mechanics. We have physics, for example. We have, some games resemble real-life physics. Some games completely defy real-life physics. Doesn't really matter. Player immersion is a really important example. Player immersion is making your gamer feel like they're in the game. So, if you've ever played a video game before and you, about 2 or 3 hours in, you kind of look up and you're like, oh, wow, I can't believe I'm still playing this. That's player immersion. It's getting much easier to do player immersion when you get stuff like a 4K and virtual reality, augmented reality. It becomes a little easier to get this whole immersion thing going on. They talk about Tetris. I would let you read these stories, like some of the stuff like Tetris Trance are really cool. These are cool things, but I'll let you read these things. Player perspective. So player perspective is a really important concept. This is probably one of the first decisions you're going to make in your game. I would argue maybe even before you're doing, in my personal experience, probably with the last 2 or 3 games I've developed, this is the first thing we come up with. We're like, what's the perspective of the player? Are they going to be first person? First person being inside the eyes. So that's like you're looking through the eyes. That's a Call of Duty, a Halo game. So this is first person perspective. I'm glad they had a picture. You have, what is second person? Hold on just a second. The player is shown the world through the eyes of a secondary character in the game who follows the main character around. I don't know about that one. It's right, technically. So technically, these are going to be games. Yeah, so these are going to be games like Mario. These are going to be games like, I guess, The Last of Us. If you want to look up The Last of Us, I guess that would technically be something like this, where you're kind of watching the main character unfold. Another one, Alan Wake is a good example of this. I don't know if I would call that, but third person is arguably my favorite. That's the one where the camera is usually going to be in a location somewhere, watching the character the whole time from the same location, usually from behind. 90% of the time, they're going to be from behind, and they're going to be watching the character out front. These are your Mass Effect games. Mass Effect is a great example of a third person. And then there are like other subcategories of third person, like over the shoulder. There's top down. Top down is just another third person, but yeah, top down is another total genre. Top down is probably the easiest to program, so that's something to think about. Probably one of the easiest games to develop is a top down game because you don't need a lot of animations. There's not a lot of animating when it comes to top down because everything just rotates. So, little hint for you. See, you're getting all this bonus, and normally you wouldn't get all this stuff because I can just talk for an hour and you can't. You guys can't interrupt me. So remember, all these things are big decisions to make whenever you're thinking about developing your game. For example, when we talk about game mechanics, we're talking about things like movement. Okay, so sometimes movement mimics real life, sometimes it doesn't. So, for example, Mario, people are not a foot tall and they don't jump 12 feet, right? It's not realistic, but that's okay. So it just depends on the feel that you're trying to give to your game. However, if you're playing Tom Clancy, which is a Tom Clancy game, which are usually like war-related or stealth RPGs or whatever, if you're playing Tom Clancy, it probably doesn't make sense for your character to jump 20 or 30 feet high unless he's riding or something. I don't know. But yeah, so make sure it makes sense in the context of what you're trying to do, okay? You don't want to make a realistic game usually. But like I said, then again, game design's all about blurring the lines. So maybe there's something where that works. I've been talking a lot, so quests and goals we're not going to talk about because we already talked about that. Ketchup. Oh, ketchup mechanics. I hate ketchup mechanics. Ketchup mechanics usually denoted by a little bottle of ketchup and a little Heinz ketchup whenever you're doing game design. If you ever see that in a game design program or you see that on your desk, that means you're working on ketchup dynamics. Ketchup mechanics are basically a concept in a lot of games where the person who's behind, or if you're playing the AI and you're behind, you get some kind of boost. Now usually you don't know about this boost. Usually this is not a thing that you know about. It's just a thing to help the gamer get better. So the idea would be like, basically, and this is something that does not happen, so I'm not saying it does, but let's say you're playing Halo and you're down by 20 kills, right? You're down by 20 kills and you're helpless. Maybe your auto aim would get better. So your range of having to hit them would get actually a lot bigger because the game feels a little bit of pity on you. Okay, so this is it's a way to help balance, but I think this is a cheap way. This is like using bacon when you're cooking, right? It's cheating. It's a way to make your game feel more balanced, even though it's really not. So anyway, that's my some of this stuff I'm going to get on a soapbox for because I'm pretty passionate about game design. So things like turns, difficulty ramping. There's this whole section is really good on difficulty ramping, and I think you should read this in detail. So some of these things, like I said, I would really want you to not only read it in detail here, but go out and do your own research about difficulty ramping. Difficulty ramping is important. If you just played Mario and every single level was like the first level, it goes back to that whole thing of challenge and it's not going to be fun. It's going to get boring really, really quick. A good example of this, and like I said, some people are going to argue with me, but that's fine. A good example of this is like Scribblenauts. Scribblenauts is such a fun game, but it's just so easy, and it's so easy throughout the whole game. There's just no challenge to me. It's just like it, and I think that's the problem. You have to ramp the difficulty. It has to get harder and harder and harder, right? There are different ways to ramp difficulty, okay? A really cheap way is in a game called Binding of Isaac. I love Binding of Isaac. It's not Binding of Isaac. Check the creators' videos. I'm right on this. But I love that game. But all they did to make it more difficult was they just made things take more hits. It's called meat shields. If you ever heard of a meat shield, that's what a meat shield is. It's a meat shield in a game is something that just takes tons and tons of damage. It doesn't feel more difficult. It just takes longer to beat, and that's really annoying. So that's what you don't want. Dark Souls is a great example of really good difficulty vamping. All right, the bosses just get harder. They don't really take longer to kill. Okay, so there's things like twitch skills and thought skills. Obviously, this is gaming 101. Okay, so twitch skills are things like Halo, like if you're flipping around to throw a grenade. These are things that you develop over time by playing over and over and over and over and over. Thought skills are different. Thought skills are strategic things, and some games really balance this well. A good example would be StarCraft. StarCraft 2 is a perfect example of where twitch skills and thought skills are married so perfectly that it makes such an amazing game, because you have to have both or you can't be good at StarCraft. And I'm really, really good at StarCraft, so I get to say that. And so there's some really good examples of other things on this page, really good examples of things like that we also use in order to create difficulty. Now, all these things can be used to create more difficulty and make your game more fun. That's the cool thing, okay? So game design is so deep, and that's kind of what I'm trying to open your eyes to in this video, and I've been going for a while, so this is good. Game design is so deep. There's so many different things to think about in game, and that's why I'm pushing you guys this year to write more, to do a lot more projects, because this is a very serious class to me, but it's also a serious class if any of you are considering doing this. So things like resource management. You may think, okay, well, there's ammo and stuff like that, but there's a big decision to make as a game designer. Do you give your player an infinite amount of ammo, right? Or do you do a thing like the Resident Evil series where resource management actually becomes part of the difficulty? You can reach certain Resident Evil games, get to the final boss and not have enough ammunition to kill it. That, to me, is really cool. Can be really annoying to some, but to me, that's cool. So you can use any of this stuff, any inventory, resource management, to ramp the difficulty of your game and to make it harder. Okay, so we talked about pseudo-randomness a little bit. Pseudo-randomness is a big deal in game design as well. A lot of things happen randomly. You should probably know that. If nothing happens randomly in a game, it's very difficult in order to make it feel like a good game. I mean, for example, Tetris is a good. I hate to keep using Tetris, but Tetris is a really good example of pseudo randomness. If you play Tetris 5 times in a row, even the original Tetris, you're not going to get the same pieces every single time. Okay, you get a separate. But if you were to play it 50 times, you'll notice a pattern. You'll notice that you're starting to get a pattern, and that's whenever you get into that whole Tetris trance, and that you guys can read about that. But so there is no such thing as true randomness in gaming. The only true randomness that you have is in other players. But other than that, in a game, especially when you're playing one player, there's no such thing as true randomness. There's a pattern to everything. Okay, so a good example of this is Pac-Man. If you ever played Pac-Man or Mrs. Pac-Man or whatever, go look up the patterns. Those things are not moving towards you with like super smart artificial intelligence. They're not. It's a pattern that they're following. And some of you that just blew your mind. You can go look that up on the internet. All right, so then I would approach and attack the text question. So that was pretty easy. I mean, that took me 30 minutes to talk through all of it. Obviously, you guys should read it more in depth, and you should copy and paste all those bold terms, all that fun stuff. I would really do that. But I would jump into the critical thinking questions first. So these are a great place to start. I put these in the order that I thought was easiest to go about it. With the critical thinking questions, remember, this is a big thing. I am not looking for length as much as I'm looking for content. Okay, I say 3 to 5 sentences because I think that's probably what it might take to describe or to properly answer these questions. So, but if you can answer it in one and it's awesome, and I'm like, wow, that's great. You summed it up in one question, in one sentence. That's fine. Okay, so I just want to make sure it's content over length here. I'm not looking for like a really, really long essay here. Like I said, it says one full paragraph for, like I said, it's really about content. It's not about the length, okay? And then once you're done with the text questions, you're going to go into the labs and the writing, okay? So we do have writing assignments for each one. These are going to disappear once we start working in our game. So once we start really working inside of our game, these are going to disappear, okay? So this is, so you got your little lab here. You're going to do a little research for this lab, which I think is really, really fun. This is exactly what I told you to do earlier. So if you watch this video and you were doing it along with me, then you're already there. So we have to write out a whole bunch of stuff. So you're just going to be doing a lot of gaming research here. We're going to be diving into a little bit more specifics about what games are and what these games do. And it's really interesting. So I encourage you to really get involved in these labs. These labs are kind of meant to be these hands-on things that teach you how to do something that we do in game design. We do that all the time. Like, we do tons of research. Like, trust me, like we do play a lot of games, but we do a lot of research about games as well, because researching a game takes a lot less time than playing a game. So anyway. All right, so then you've got and then here's another thing too you're going to start getting. And remember, I am totally open to alternative assessments. I really am. If you're just not a writer, if this is not something you're into, let me know. All right, you could do a podcast for me. We could do like a video for stuff. As long as you are able to prove to me that you understand this content, I'm cool with it. The game design industry might not be, so I do encourage you to write a little bit or to work on this stuff a little bit. But for me, it's not such a big deal as long as you can prove to me that you know the content. And in some of these assignments, you're going to start getting these demonstration sections, which are great. These are where you get to start kind of showing your personality and showing the things that that you know through things like videos or graphic design or pictures. And this is going to be really cool. All right, so take a look at that. I think you have one more activity in this unit, and then there's like the quiz as always. And the quiz is going to be focused heavily on the bolded sections. Remember, that's the question, the bolded words. Those are the ones whenever you do your final are going to be mostly on your final, so make sure you're keeping up with those. Other than that, so this is a good video, guys. Like I said, sometimes I like to jump on here and just kind of rant for 30 or 40 minutes. Watch this video a couple times. Let me know if you have any questions about the concepts in Unit 2, because once we start Unit 3, we kind of start really getting into the nitty-gritty of game design. So this is kind of the end of your foundations, and then for the rest of the year, we're pretty much designing. So I'm really excited about it. But like I said, always, guys, if you need a one-on-one session, reach out to me. I have a couple people doing it this week already. If you need a one-on-one session, let me know. If not, just send me an email or whatever. I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. And that's pretty much it. So I will see you guys all in class on Tuesday, and I'll try to send out another recording on Thursday as well.